Margaret Hawthorne had started working at the Fableford library fresh out of college, drawn by its warm, ivy-covered brick walls and hush of possibility that lingered in every aisle. Over the years she'd grown familiar with its creaky floorboards, the eccentric patrons who roamed its shelves, and even the faint smell of lemon polish used nightly by the custodians. There was comfort in that familiarity, a sense of belonging that filled her heart whenever she unlocked the heavy oak doors each morning. On a brisk October evening, she stayed past closing time to prepare for the annual autumn book fair. With the lights dimmed and no chatter to distract her, she decided to reorganize a remote corner of the library that almost no one visited anymore, where the older reference books were kept. She lugged a heavy cart stacked with dusty volumes of encyclopedias and dictionaries down the corridor, the wheels squeaking in a manner reminiscent of a complaining cat. She paused before the rarely used door leading to a tiny storage alcove. It was locked, but as the librarian, Margaret had the master key. She turned it in the squealing lock, forcing the door open. A swirl of stale air greeted her, and she flicked on the flickering overhead light. Inside, she noticed a cluster of mismatched chairs covered with white sheets and a few wooden boxes stacked high. Her intention was just to store a few older books here until she had time to donate or catalogue them. But something else caught her eye. A narrow gap between two towering shelves. Curiosity nudged her forward. She stepped closer, shining her phone's flashlight into the gap, where a hidden nook seemed to yawn open in the darkness. The space looked as though it had once been part of the storage alcove, but had been closed off by the library's renovations decades ago. Edging past the old boxes, Margaret discovered a single wooden chair beneath a dusty stained glass lamp, its coloured panes casting patterns on the worn-out floor. In front of the chair sat a small end table, and on it lay a stack of old papers. Margaret's heart gave a little flutter of excitement at the possibility of uncovering a hidden piece of the library's history. She brushed away a thick layer of dust and National Produce stickers, revealing a small stack of aged documents. Most were old newsletters detailing library events from the 1950s and 60s, with photos of bespectacled librarians standing proudly before new sections of shelving. One pamphlet bragged of hosting a travelling art exhibit. Another announced a short-lived reading club. But the third sheet of paper looked different. Thicker, almost like parchment, and neatly folded into eighths. When she unfurled it, she discovered it was a letter, carefully scripted in faded black ink. Margaret leaned against the table and began to read. To whom it may concern, betrayal often lurks in the shelves of our daily lives, disguised as ordinary events. People have taken that which is mine, but I shall not stand idly by. I will reclaim what was stolen and ensure those who wronged me understand the gravity of their actions. Once these words come to pass, everyone in Fableford shall know the name of the avenger. They'll beg for forgiveness. The closing was signed in an elegant swirl of letters. M.B. Margaret's breath caught in her throat at the seething tone of vengeance. She glanced around, half expecting someone to leap from behind the shelves, but all remained quiet. Why was such a letter hidden here? Who was M.B., and what exactly did they hope to accomplish? She felt a strange chill in the silence of that alcove as she flipped the letter around, looking for more. Faint notes jotted in the margins looked like cryptic references, dates and initials possibly. She squinted, trying to decipher them. An R, a G, a date from 1975. Everything else was smudged. It was not a pleasant feeling, stumbling upon something so steeped in malice. But Margaret had always been insatiably curious, a trait that helped her excel as a librarian. She tucked the letter carefully into her cardigan pocket. Someone needed to know about this. Perhaps it was just historical curiosity, some dusty piece of gossip from decades ago. But she sensed there might be more to the story, perhaps an unsolved mystery from Fableford's history. Resolving to look into the matter the next day, she locked up the little alcove and made her way home, the secret letter weighing heavily on her mind. The next morning, Margaret arrived early, her thoughts still consumed by the letter. She wanted to see if the library's archive held any references to an MB with ties to revenge or scandal. The trouble was that Fableford's official records were notoriously incomplete. Many important documents had been lost in the library flood of 1982, which left entire boxes of precious archives mouldering. Still, there were some old microfilms, plus a few battered ledgers that had survived. She decided to begin poking through them. She filed through an ancient ledger of Fableford births, marriages, and deaths, compiled rather haphazardly by volunteers. Her gaze ran down countless names, checking for any initials M, B that might match. Margaret had to pause occasionally to rub her eyes. The lettering was so small and irregular, it felt like trying to read someone's slanted handwriting on a train. Finally, near the bottom of a page listing death notices, she found something interesting. Marion Bloom, deceased 1975, at age 34. Margaret's pulse quickened. That year matched one of the dates scrawled onto the mysterious letter. Curious, she peeled her eyes for any additional details, but found only a note stating that Marion was a local teacher who had died under unusual circumstances. No further explanation was offered. She scribbled down the name and date, resolving to consult the local newspaper microfilms. If there had been something truly unusual about Marion Bloom's circumstances, perhaps the local paper had reported on it. The microphone machine sizzled and hummed as Margaret wound through reels labelled for 1975. Occasional black and white photos slid past on the screen, each capturing small-town scenes, picnics in the park, election campaigns, spirited high school football games. Finally, she stopped at a headline that made her heart lurch. Teacher found lifeless near riverside foul play suspected. She read on, her fingertips hovering over the machine's dials. Fableford elementary educator Marion Bloom, age 34, was found unconscious by the west bank of Rowan River at the edge of town. Efforts to resuscitate her failed. Investigators have not determined the cause of death, but early reports suggest she suffered a blow to the head. No arrests have been made. Mrs. Bloom was well liked by her students and known for her involvement in community events. Margaret noticed no mention of the letter or any talk of revenge. She continued scrolling through the following week's columns, searching for more about Marion's death. Lacking modern technology, small-town reporting from the 1970s often meandered, offering rumours and chatter rather than concrete facts. But in an article 2 weeks later, she spotted a snippet. Police are investigating local speculation that Ms. Bloom had enemies due to a personal dispute. Although no suspects have been identified at this time, the investigation continues, leaving Fableford residents unsettled by the tragedy. Margaret rubbed her temples. There was no direct mention of someone with the initials MB seeking revenge. Of course, Marion herself had the initials MB, but would she plan revenge on her own behalf? That made no sense, unless the letter was a decoy, or if there was more to the story. Perhaps the letter's writer was someone who considered themselves a champion of Marion, or else there was a twist. She felt the prickling thrill of a puzzle hooking her attention, the same sensation that had once led her to devour entire series of detective novels in a weekend. She carefully documented her findings, fully aware that these articles might be incomplete. Newspapers often omitted details in the name of courtesy or lack of evidence, yet Margaret wondered why someone in the 1970s would hide a malicious note in a secret nook of the library. Even more pressing, was there any chance that this twisted vow for revenge extended into the present day? At lunchtime, Margaret found another resource. Her friend Peyton Hadley worked as the part-time curator for the Fableford Historical Society, located just across the street. Peyton had grown up in Fableford and had an encyclopedic knowledge of old family feuds, local legends, and interesting tidbits that never made it into official records. Over a cup of chamomile tea in her dusty office, Peyton listened to Margaret's story. her eyes widening. A letter in a hidden nook of the library? That's quite something, she said, setting her teacup down. MB might mean a dozen different names in a town like ours, especially if we go back far enough, but Marion Bloom was definitely a name that caused a stir back then. Peyton flipped open a bulky binder she kept of older gossip columns and editorials, snippets she thought too intriguing to discard. She rifled through yellowed clippings until she stumbled upon a short editorial titled Tragedy and Tension in Fableford, dated 2 months after Marion's passing. She read aloud. While the community mourns the loss of rumors swirl regarding her rumored affair with a prominent local figure's spouse. Some suggest that her demise on the riverbank might not have been accidental. If the rumors hold true, a thirst for vengeance may still grip our community. Margaret breathed a soft gasp. An affair? The letter's mention of betrayal? The vow of revenge? It was all swirling together. Could it be that Marion Bloom was threatened by someone's jealous spouse? Peyton drummed her fingers on the edges of the clipping. Possibly. According to my mother, Marion was terribly charming, and rumours swirled that she was involved with Dr. Raleigh, the town's chiropractor, but that was never confirmed. Likewise, some folks attached her name to the mayor's wife. It wasn't clear if there was any truth to those rumours. The point is that it caused a scandal. Margaret leaned forward, tapping the table. If Marion was rumoured to be having an affair, then that letter might have been written by someone who felt betrayed. Or perhaps Marion wrote it herself, feeling betrayed by a lover who left her. But how did it end up in that hidden nook? Secrets in small towns have a way of being tucked into corners, Peyton mused, smiling wryly. We might need to dig deeper. That evening, unable to stop thinking about the letter, Margaret decided to examine it again more closely. She spread it out on her desk at home, scanning for details she might have missed. The phrase, "Everyone in Fableford shall know the name," stood out in a chilling way. Under the gentle glow of a desk lamp, she took a magnifying glass and carefully inspected the edges. There was a seal in one corner, a small embossed stamp, that looked like it might belong to a notary or a legal firm. Her heart skipped a beat. Is it possible this letter was part of some official document? The embossing, while partially faded, revealed 2 letters. C.R. She jotted them down on a notepad. There was no local law firm by that name today, but perhaps it existed in the past. Once again she felt an electric curiosity compelling her forward. She turned the page over, rereading the scrawled margin notes. There was the date from 1975, the initials R and G, and what looked like the partial word liabel or liai. The script was so smudged that she couldn't be sure. Liaison? Liability? These fragments gave her no definitive answer. When she spoke to Peyton about the embossing the next day, Peyton's eyebrows rose. That could have been the old Collins and Reacher, a legal firm that dissolved in the late 1970s after Reacher retired. They handled all sorts of contracts and property matters in town. If that's the case, maybe the letter was part of an official file dealing with the estate or some real estate transaction. If Marion Bloom owned property or was involved in a dispute, Collins and Reacher might have documented it. Margaret and Peyton decided to pay a visit to the basement of Town Hall, known for housing boxes of dusty legal records. After explaining their quest to a baffled clerk, they secured permission to access some archives. The basement smelled of old paper and mildew, with shelves crammed with manila folders from decades past. They spent hours rifling through property deeds, wills, and legal correspondences, their eyes blurred with the repetitive details of land transfers and disclaimers. Finally, Margaret uncovered something, a file titled Bloom Estate. Within its pages were routine papers about the modest house that Marion had inherited from her aunt. But at the back, pinned together by a rusty staple, were several sheets referencing a dispute. One letter, dated just a month before Marion's death, had the letterhead of Collins and Reacher and was addressed to a Mr. Glenn R. Wheeler. She read it out loud to Peyton. Dear Mr. Wheeler, we are handling certain concerns raised by Ms. Bloom pertaining to the potential breach of trust in your arrangement. Ms. Bloom claims to have evidence of wrongdoing on your part, and we are instructed to prepare legal recourse if necessary. Margaret paused, heart thudding. This is clearly a dispute, and Marian had a lawyer threatening Mr. Wheeler with legal proceedings. Could Glenn Wheeler be the G in those margin notes? Peyton moved in closer to read. Another clipped note in the file read, breach pertaining to unfulfilled promises and personal harm. It was cryptic, but it painted a picture of some personal betrayal between Marian and Mr. Wheeler. Was he the married man rumored to be in a relationship with her, or did it concern money? None of the documents spelled it out precisely. As they pored over the file, Margaret spotted a detail that made her skin tingle. There was a reference to compensation for emotional duress, and also a mention of potentially incriminating letters. A typed paragraph indicated that Ms. Bloom's lawyer was in possession of a letter wherein Marian threatened to expose Mr. Wheeler's wrongdoing unless he rectified whatever harm he'd done. The lines read, should Mr. Wheeler fail to comply, Ms. Bloom vows to hold him publicly accountable. Peyton said, that letter from the hidden nook might have been one of those. But if Marian's name was also M.M., could she have referred to herself in third person or simply signed it with her initials? Margaret sank into a folding chair, the musty air thick with tension. It's possible the letter we found was worded in such a way that it implies the writer feels betrayed. Marian might have suspected Glenn Wheeler stole something from her love, property, or dignity, and she wanted revenge. Perhaps she wrote that letter as a last resort, determined to go public. But then her life ended abruptly by the river. Peyton nodded, her face clouding with worry. At the time, the case was never solved. If Glenn Wheeler was involved in any wrongdoing, he was never charged. She hesitated. We should check the phone directories or local records to see if Glenn Wheeler stayed in town. Maybe we can talk to someone who knew him. With more digging, Margaret learned that Glenn Wheeler had left Fableford soon after Marian's death. Some rumors said he moved to Georgia, others thought he fled overseas. As far as official records were concerned, he never showed up in Fableford again. Although her investigation into old mysteries could only do so much, Margaret felt strongly that the letter's ominous vow of revenge must have been Marian's last statement, hidden in the library's nook, either by Marian herself or by someone who found it and didn't want it discovered. Yet questions lingered. Was Marian's death truly an accident? Did Glenn Wheeler vanish out of guilt or fear? And why was the letter never brought to the police's attention? Despite her swirling thoughts, Margaret realized she might never find a definitive answer, decades after the fact. Still, she felt compelled to bring at least part of the truth to light. Returning to the library, she carefully refiled the property deeds and legal correspondences, making scanned copies of the relevant passages for safekeeping. She took the original letter from her cardigan pocket, its parchment so fragile, and gently placed it in an acid-free sleeve. Whatever threat or heartbreak it represented, it remained a testament to a life cut short by tragedy and secrets. Margaret's boss, Miss Hollowell, asked her that afternoon if everything was all right. Margaret gave a small smile, deciding not to burden Miss Hollowell with the entire sordid story. It seemed safer, kinder, to keep it discreet, especially since the case was decades old and wouldn't likely see a formal resolution. In the days that followed, Margaret found her thoughts drawn repeatedly to Marian Bloom. She discovered that a battered old photograph of Marian existed in the library's yearbook archives. It showed a bright-eyed woman with a gentle smile, standing outside the elementary school with a group of children. She wore a neatly pinned style of hair, and there was a hint of graciousness in her expression. It was difficult to imagine her penning such a dark, vengeful note, but heartbreak and betrayal could lead even the mildest souls down desperate paths. Though most of Fableford's residents from that era had scattered or passed away, Margaret made it her mission to ensure Marian's story was not forgotten. She opted to incorporate some local historical segments into the town's past, including unsolved mysteries of the town's past, including unsolved mysteries. Peyton promised to loan any relevant documents from the Historical Society's archives, giving visitors a glimpse into the intangible threads of memory that wove Fableford's tapestry. During a quiet moment beneath the tall arched windows, Margaret pulled out that acid-free sleeve, gazing at Marian's letter one last time. Life held countless stories that never reached closure. Especially in old towns like Fableford, people came and went with their secrets tucked under floorboards, in diaries and letters. Some were discovered, others remained hidden forever. This letter at least would no longer be buried in darkness. Late one Saturday, after the library closed, Margaret carefully placed the letter and all supporting research in an exhibit case near the library entrance. The display read, Fableford's Unsolved Histories, featuring newspaper clippings, photographs, and brief explanations of the mysteries that once rippled through the town. She paused, wondering if she should include the more sinister language of the letter for all to see. Ultimately, she decided to redact the most threatening lines. There was no sense in frightening or distressing visitors, especially not in a place meant to nurture curiosity and comfort. When Monday morning dawned, a handful of townspeople gathered around the new exhibit. Their hushed whispers and curious gazes lingered on the old photos and typed articles. Margaret overheard them exchanging theories she'd read 100 times herself. Maybe Marian had discovered wrongdoing that no one else did. Maybe she died by accident. Or maybe she confronted the wrong person. Rumors would swirl anew, yet she hoped that someone who knew the truth might come forward, even after all these years, and shed light on the puzzle that had haunted the musty corners of Fableford for so long. One afternoon, a man in his 60s stopped by the exhibit, leaning heavily on a cane. Margaret watched from behind the circulation desk as he peered at the letter's partial text. She recognized him as Rupert Anders, an old friend of Marianne's family. He hadn't been in the library for months. The memory struck Margaret that Rupert's father had once worked with Mr. Wheeler on local construction projects. Perhaps, she thought with quiet hope, he might recall a clue. After a lengthy silence, Rupert ambled over to the circulation desk, his voice low. "I see you found Marian's letter," he said, a sigh escaping him. Her eyes widened. "Yes, it was tucked away in a hidden reading nook. I've been trying to piece together what happened." Rupert nodded slowly. "I remember hearing about that letter. Marian wrote it when she figured out Glenn was conning her. He promised to run away together, or so she believed, but instead he took advantage of her trust. Rumor had it he borrowed money for a business scheme, construction or new property. She lost her savings, and when she demanded restitution, he turned hostile. She threatened to expose him, so he threatened her in return." Margaret felt a shiver ripple up her arms. So the letter was real. Did Glenn kill her? Rupert pursed his lips, regret shadowing his eyes. "Nobody knows for sure. But there was a confrontation by the riverside that day. Some folks think she slipped and fell, some think Glenn pushed her. Whichever the case, he vanished soon after. A relative of mine told me she'd hidden the letter in that nook, hoping the library staff or police would discover it someday and reopen the case, but then life went on and no one remembered. Until now." Margaret thanked him sincerely for sharing his recollections. Although her heart felt heavy, she also sensed relief that her discovery had not simply vanished into rumor once more. Rupert's words confirmed that Marian's letter mirrored the painful reality of betrayal and heartbreak. For a moment, Margaret pictured a younger Marian, forging that bold threat in a desperate attempt to reclaim her stolen future, only to lose it all at the waterside. The library's autumn book fair arrived a few days later. The reading room bustled with folks flipping through gently worn novels, children giggling at picture books, and local authors signing copies of their latest cozy mysteries. Outside the tall windows, the leaves shimmered gold and orange. The sweet scent of spiced cider drifted through the open doors, welcoming all who ventured in. Between greeting visitors and managing transactions, Margaret found moments to reflect on how the discovery of that hidden nook had changed her own perspective. And beyond the grim secret, it reminded her that beneath every tattered volume or obscure file, there might be a story waiting to be told. The existence of the letter and the tragedy behind it underscored how important librarianship truly was, caring for the knowledge and the narratives that shape a community. That night, as the last stragglers waved goodbye and the library fell silent once more, Margaret slowly made her rounds, ensuring everything was tidied up. She found herself drawn once again to the hidden reading nook. Hers was the only set of footsteps echoing through the aisles. With her flashlight guiding the way, she slipped past the storage boxes, eyeing the solitary chair beneath the dusty, stained glass lamp. She could almost sense Marian's presence lingering, a ghostly echo of heartbreak and courage. Margaret placed a hand on the chair, thinking of the letter that no longer lay there. "Your story's out in the light now," she murmured. "I hope that brings you some peace." Turning away, she locked the alcove door for the night. Outside, the moon cast a soft glow over the lawn and the winding path leading home. In her jacket pocket she carried no hidden letters, only the quiet satisfaction that she had served as a keeper of truth, however incomplete or heartbreaking it might be. Sometimes in life, finding the answers wasn't as important as preserving the questions. Secrets, after all, had a way of demanding to be heard, and in Fableford, with its creaking floors and whispering shelves, even the darkest corners could not remain hidden forever,